She changed the locks while I was gone. Not the way you change a light bulb, not the way you swap out a doormat when the old one wears thin. She changed them with intention, with planning, with the quiet confidence of a woman who had already decided, long before I pulled into my own driveway on that cold Sunday morning, that the door I had walked through for 41 years no longer belonged to me. My name is Dorothy Mae Calloway. I am 63 years old. I taught 3rd grade at Vine City Elementary for 35 years. I raised one son in a 3-bedroom house on Hollowell Parkway in Atlanta, Georgia, and I paid off that house with my own hands, my hands and my husband Reginald's, in the summer of 2001. We stood in the driveway that day, both of us in our good clothes even though there was nowhere to go, and Reginald held up the paid-off mortgage certificate like it was a trophy, like it was the most important piece of paper either of us had ever touched. It was. I am going to tell you what happened to me. Not because I want your pity. Lord knows I have had enough of people's pity to last 2 lifetimes. I am telling you because I think some of you already know this story. Maybe not the details, but the feeling. That slow, creeping feeling of disappearing inside a place that is supposed to be yours. I want you to know what I did about it. The house was never fancy. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, low ceilings, hardwood floors that had been refinished twice and still told the truth about every place a chair had been dragged, every spot where a child had dropped something heavy. The kitchen faced east, which meant that every morning the sun came in low and golden across the countertop, and if you stood at the sink just right, it hit you in the face like a warm hand. Reginald and I bought it in 1983. We were both 29. Our son Darnell was 2 years old and convinced that every cabinet in the world existed solely for him to open and close repeatedly. The realtor, a thin man named Gerald with a mustache he was very proud of, told us the house needed some cosmetic attention. What he meant was, the kitchen appliances were avocado green, the bathroom had rust stains that had been there since the Johnson administration, and someone had wallpapered the master bedroom with a pattern of brown owls that Reginald said looked like they were judging us personally. But the backyard faced west, and in the evenings the light came through the pecan tree and laid itself down across the grass in long gold stripes. And the magnolia trees in the front yard, 2 of them, already tall when we moved in, bloomed white every spring like they were trying to say something important. We bought it. It took us 11 years to refinish the floors, 14 years to replace the avocado green appliances, and 22 years to finally scrape off every last one of those brown owls. But we did it all ourselves, on a teacher's salary and a mechanic's salary, and every improvement felt like something we had earned down to the bone. Reginald died on the back porch on a Tuesday morning in June 8 years ago. He was sitting in his old aluminum lawn chair, the kind with the woven plastic strips that leave a crosshatch pattern on the back of your thighs, drinking his 2nd cup of coffee and reading the sports section. I came out with a piece of toast and my reading glasses, and I knew before I even reached him. The way his head was resting, the way the paper had fallen. I sat down next to him. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just sat there beside him in the morning sun for a few minutes, holding his hand, before I went inside to call anyone. The doctors said it was fast. I have held on to that. After he was gone, I learned how to be alone in a way I had never had to be before. It is a different kind of skill than people think. It is not about not being lonely. Some days I was very lonely. It is about learning which silences are peaceful and which ones are asking something of you, and learning how to tell the difference. I got good at it over time. Reverend Althea Burgess, my oldest and truest friend, called every evening at 7 o'clock. My neighbor Brenda Okafor came by every Tuesday with something she had baked, always claiming she had made too much, though we both knew better. I volunteered at the school 3 mornings a week, reading to the kindergartners. And those children had a way of filling up a room that reminded me why I had spent 35 years doing what I did. Life was quiet. Life was mine. And then my son called. Darnell is 38 years old. He has his father's jaw and his father's laugh, and, I say this with love, his father's tendency to avoid a hard conversation until it has grown so large that it fills every room in the house and you cannot look anywhere else. He called me on a Thursday evening in February. I was in the kitchen making a pot of red beans and rice, Reginald's favorite, which I still made every Thursday out of habit, or maybe out of something more than habit. And when I saw Darnell's name on the phone, I felt a small, familiar warmth in my chest. That warmth is a mother's greatest vulnerability. I say that not as a complaint, just as a fact. "Mama," he said, and I could tell immediately from the way he said that one word that something was coming. Darnell has always led with my name when he needed something. Not hello, not how are you. Just Mama stretched out like a runway he needed before he could land. He explained it carefully, in the measured voice of a man who had rehearsed this. The startup he had been with for 4 years had been acquired. His position had been restructured, which is the word people use when they want to fire you without saying the word fired. Simone's income from her lifestyle brand. She was what people called an influencer, though I had always had trouble saying that word with a straight face, had slowed considerably. A brand partnership they had counted on had fallen through. "It's just a tight few months, Mama," he said, "until I land somewhere new, until Simone's contracts pick back up." I looked at Reginald's photograph on the kitchen windowsill. It was the one from our 25th wedding anniversary, both of us sunburned from a day trip to Savannah, both of us laughing at something the photographer had said. I could almost hear Reginald's voice. "Dorothy May. Don't let love make you foolish, but this was my son, my only child. The boy who, at 4 years old, had once tried to make me breakfast in bed and presented me with a plate of untoasted bread and a cup of warm tap water with a tea bag floating in it, and looked at me with such absolute pride that I ate every bite and told him it was the best meal I had ever had." "All right," I said. "But Darnell, temporary means temporary." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and he sounded so relieved that it almost broke my heart. Almost. They arrived on a Sunday with 14 boxes, 2 garment bags, a yoga mat, a ring light taller than I was, a portable speaker system, and a cat named Versace that I had not been informed about. I want to be fair here. I want to be precise. Simone Calloway, née Whitfield from Chicago, 35 years old, cheekbones that could cut glass and an Instagram following of 240,000 people, was not what I would call an unkind person. Not exactly. She was the kind of person who moved through the world with such certainty about her own importance that she simply did not notice when she was unkind. There is a difference, I think, though the effect is much the same. She stepped through my front door, looked around my living room, the room where Darnell had taken his first steps, where Reginald and I had slow danced to Frankie Beverly every New Year's Eve for 30 years, and said, "The lighting in here is really challenging for content. Is there any way to move the sofa closer to the window?" I moved the sofa. I told myself it was just furniture. I told myself it was temporary. The first week, she replaced the motivational chalkboard I kept above the kitchen door, the one that said "Keep going, baby" in my own handwriting, with a printed sign in a thin gold frame that read, "Good energy only." She didn't ask. I found my chalkboard in the recycling bin. I took it out of the recycling bin and put it in my bedroom closet. The second week, she asked if I could refrain from cooking fish indoors. The smell, she explained, interfered with the atmosphere she was trying to create for her videos. I began cooking fish at Brenda's house on Wednesdays. The third week, I opened the refrigerator one morning and found that my half of it had been compressed into a single shelf on the bottom. Everything else had been reorganized. Simone's name written on each of her items in black marker, precise and unapologetic as a land survey. I did not say anything. I moved my things to the bottom shelf. The fourth week, I went to the living room to retrieve a book I had left on the side table, and found that the embroidered piece that had hung on that wall for 30 years, the one my mother had made for me before she died, the one that read, "A house is wood and nail, a home is blood and love," was gone. I found it in the hallway, leaning against the wall near the coat closet, facing inward. "Oh," Simone said when I asked about it. She was sitting at the kitchen table editing video on her laptop, and she glanced up the way you might glance at someone who has interrupted you to ask where you put the scissors. "It was making the background look cluttered. It doesn't really match the aesthetic we're going for in here." The aesthetic. I picked up my mother's embroidery. I carried it upstairs to the attic. I wrapped it in a piece of flannel and set it on the shelf next to Reginald's old fishing tackle box. Then I came back downstairs, washed my hands at the kitchen sink, and started making dinner. I did not say one word. Darnell that evening asked me if I was okay. I told him I was fine. He nodded, relieved, the way people nod when they want to believe the answer they've been given. We talked about other things, the weather, the Braves' spring training, whether the pecan tree in the backyard needed trimming. He did not mention his mother's embroidery. He had seen it too. I know he had. By the end of the first month, I had stopped watching television in the living room because Simone meditated there in the evenings and required silence. I had moved my puzzles from the kitchen table to my bedroom because the pieces created visual clutter. I had stopped leaving my slippers by the couch. They kept appearing each morning, neatly lined up by the front door, as if waiting to be walked out of the house. I want you to understand what that does to a person, not the slippers themselves, but the accumulation, the way each small thing you surrender creates space for the next thing to be taken, the way you start tiptoeing around a house you have lived in for 41 years, carrying your quiet like something breakable, afraid that if you set it down wrong, something will shatter. I had become a guest in my own home. Not even a guest. Guests are expected. Guests are welcomed. I had become something more like a remaining piece of furniture. Inconvenient, but not quite worth the effort of removing. It was Reverend Althea who said it plainly, as Althea always did. Dorothy May, she told me one evening on the phone, her voice carrying the particular weight of a woman who has shepherded a congregation through enough human folly to know it when she sees it. There are people who walk into someone else's house and slowly, quietly, begin to rebuild it into their own. They don't need a key. They only need the owner's silence. I didn't respond right away. I was looking out the kitchen window at my garden. The okra plants I had grown from seed every summer for 20 years. The collard greens that Reginald used to pick fresh on Sunday mornings. The 2 tomato cages leaning against the fence, waiting for spring. I hear you, Althea, I said. Do you? She said, not unkindly, just honestly. I'm thinking about it, I told her. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The clock above the refrigerator, the one Reginald had never gotten around to fixing, always running 15 seconds slow, ticked its quiet, imprecise rhythm. Versace the cat, whom I had in fact come to tolerate somewhat, sat on the windowsill and regarded me with the detached judgment that only cats and disappointed mothers have truly mastered. I thought about my mother's embroidery in the attic. I thought about Reginald's lawn chair on the back porch. Still there, at least. I thought about the bottom shelf of the refrigerator. I thought about my slippers by the front door every morning. I thought about the recycling bin. I thought about what it meant to own something. Not just legally, not just on paper, but in your bones. In the place where you know who you are and where you came from and what you will and will not allow. I had allowed quite a lot. I was still thinking about how to stop when Althea called 3 weeks later to tell me her arthritis had flared up badly and would I come stay for a few days. I told Darnell on a Wednesday evening. He was at the kitchen table on his laptop, applying for jobs, and he looked up when I mentioned it. That's good, Mama, he said. Althea could use the company, I told Simone on Thursday morning. She was in the living room doing what she called her morning flow, a series of movements with a yoga mat and a candle and a small Bluetooth speaker playing the kind of music that sounds like someone dropped a wind chime into a fish tank. I'm going up to Althea's for a few days, I told her. Back Sunday. She looked up, and something moved across her face, something quick and bright, like a window shade snapping up. Oh, that's wonderful, she said. Get some fresh air. You deserve a break. I looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then I said, I'll leave a note with the details. And I went upstairs to pack my overnight bag. That night I could not sleep. I lay in the dark in the room I had shared with Reginald for 38 years, listening to the house settle around me. The particular creaks and murmurs of a structure that knows your weight, that has adjusted itself over decades to the specific rhythms of your presence. At 2 a.m, I got up for a glass of water. The kitchen light was off, but the lamp in the living room was on, and I could hear Simone's voice, low and careful, from around the corner. I stopped in the hallway. She's leaving Friday morning, Simone was saying. I'll call the locksmith Saturday. Early. No, Darnell knows. He's not going to say anything. You know how he is. I just want this house to feel like ours. Finally. 3 months and I still feel like I'm living in someone else's museum. I stood in the dark hallway of my own home, in my nightgown, with my glass of water, and I listened to my daughter-in-law plan how to lock me out of my own front door. I did not make a sound. I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed where Reginald and I had slept for 38 years. I set the glass of water on the nightstand, and I thought, with a clarity that surprised me with its calmness, about what I was going to do. In the morning, I fried eggs. I made biscuits. I set the table with the good napkins, Not the paper ones, the cloth ones I kept in the second drawer. Darnell came down first, and I watched his face when he saw the table set that way, and I watched him not quite meet my eyes. He knew. He had known, and he had said nothing, and he had sat at my table and eaten my biscuits and let it happen anyway. I poured him a cup of coffee. I sat across from him. I said, "I'm heading out around 9. "Okay, Mama," he said. "Drive safe." "I will," I said. And in my mind, quiet and certain as the roots of those 2 magnolia trees out front, I was already making a plan. I drove to Althea's that Friday morning with my overnight bag in the trunk and Earl Dupree's number written on a piece of paper in my coat pocket. Earl had been Reginald's friend since 1979. Short man, copper-colored, always wore suspenders regardless of the occasion. He had been a locksmith his entire adult life, and he was, Reginald always said, the most honest man in Atlanta, which was a high compliment from a man who did not give compliments carelessly. I had looked up his number in my old address book before I left, the address book I kept in my nightstand, the one with the soft green cover, the one that had never left that drawer in 15 years. It was there between Linda's pie crust, the real one, and Dr. Porter. Darnell's pediatrician, retired. Earl Dupree. His number had not changed. I drove north on 875 with the heat on and the radio tuned to the gospel station out of Marietta. Outside Atlanta, the landscape opened up. Red clay and pine trees. A sky so pale blue it looked like it hadn't finished deciding what color it wanted to be. I thought about my mother's embroidery in the attic, about my slippers by the front door, about Simone's voice in the dark. I just want this house to feel like ours, finally. I thought about 1983, and Reginald holding up that mortgage certificate. I thought about the brown owls we scraped off the bedroom walls. I thought about the summer we refinished the floors ourselves, on our knees for 3 weekends straight. Reginald's back giving him trouble the whole time, but neither of us willing to stop. I thought about what Althea had said. They only need the owner's silence. I was done being silent. I turned up the radio. A choir was singing something bright and determined, all those voices rising together, and I drove north into the pale blue morning, and I let myself feel, for the first time in 3 months, absolutely certain. I knew what I had come from. I knew what I had built. And I knew, the way you know things that live in your bones and not just your head, that no one was going to take it from me, not without finding out exactly who Dorothy Mae Calloway was when she decided to stop being quiet. Althea lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Marietta, 40 minutes north of Atlanta, on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like pine cleaner and somebody's good cooking at all hours of the day. She had lived there for 12 years, ever since she sold the house she and her late husband Robert had shared, and she had made it into something warm and particular. Shelves of theology books with cracked spines, a quilt on the couch that her grandmother had made, photographs of her congregation covering nearly every surface like a testimony. She met me at the door in her housecoat and her reading glasses, moving slower than I liked to see, her right hand wrapped around a cane she had only recently agreed to start using. Arthritis had been working on her joints for years, patient and persistent as water on stone. "Dorothy Mae," she said, and held out her free arm. I walked into it and held on longer than I usually would have. She didn't say anything about that. Althea has always known when to speak and when to simply be present, which is perhaps the most underrated skill a human being can possess. We sat at her kitchen table and she made chamomile tea and I told her everything. Not the summarized version, not the version designed to make it seem more manageable than it was. All of it. The embroidery in the attic, the slippers by the front door, the bottom shelf of the refrigerator, Simone's voice in this dark hallway, low and certain. "I'll call the locksmith Saturday. Early." Althea listened without interrupting. She held her tea with both hands and looked at me steadily across the table, and when I was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Darnell knew," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," and said nothing. "He ate my biscuits and said nothing." Althea set her cup down. "Dorothy Mae, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to let them do it," I said. She raised her eyebrows. "I'm going to let them change the lock," I said, "and then I'm going to change it back." Althea looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked her cup back up. "Earl Dupree," she said. "Earl Dupree." She nodded slowly, the way she nodded when a sermon was going somewhere she approved of. "And then?" "And then I'm calling Howard Lattimore." At that, something shifted in Althea's expression. Not surprise. something quieter than surprise. The look of a woman who has prayed for a friend for a long time and is watching the prayer begin to answer itself. "Good," she said simply. "It's about time." We spent 2 days together, Althea and I, moving at the pace her joints required. Slow mornings, afternoon naps, evenings on her small balcony wrapped in blankets watching the lights of Marietta come on one by one. We talked about everything and nothing. Her congregation, the new young minister she was mentoring, a book we had both read separately and wanted to argue about. Robert, her husband, gone 6 years. Reginald. We talked about our children the way mothers of a certain age talk about their children, with love that has survived disappointment, which is a different and deeper thing than love that has never been tested. "He's a good man," I told her about Darnell. "He's a good man who learned somewhere along the way that keeping the peace is the same thing as doing right. And those are not the same thing. Not even close." "No," Althea agreed. "They are not." Reginald always said Darnell had too much wind in him and not enough roots. I looked out at the lights below. I used to argue with him about that. I don't anymore. "The roots can still grow," Althea said. "It's not too late for roots." I thought about that. I thought about my magnolia trees out front, how slow they had been to establish themselves, how for the first 3 years we had worried they might not survive. And then one April morning we looked out, and both of them were blooming white and extravagant and completely committed to the business of living. "Maybe so," I said. On Saturday evening I was sitting on Althea's couch reading when my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. It said only, "Job complete, 2 new keys cut. Let me know if you need anything else." Below it was a name, Secure Lock Pro. I turned the phone face down on the cushion beside me. Althea looked up from her book. She read my face the way she had been reading my face for 40 years. "It's done?" she asked. "It's done." She returned to her book. "Then sleep well tonight," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." I left Marietta at 5:30 Sunday morning. I had not slept particularly well, but not from distress, more from the particular alertness that comes when your body understands that something important is about to happen and wants to make sure you are paying attention. I had lain in Althea's guest room in the dark and thought through every step of what I intended to do, and by the time the sky began to lighten, I was dressed and had my bag by the door. Althea was already up. She was at her kitchen table with her Bible open, her reading glasses on, a cup of tea steaming beside her. She looked up when I appeared. "You don't have to come with me," I told her. She hadn't offered. I knew she wouldn't be able to with her hip, and I wouldn't have let her anyway. But I said it. "I know I don't," she said. "You don't need me there. You never did." She reached out and squeezed my hand across the table. "Call me when it's done." "I will." "Dorothy May." I looked at her. "You stand straight," she said. "You hear me? You stand straight the whole time." "Yes, ma'am," I said, and I meant it. I drove south on I-75 as the sky turned from dark blue to the particular pale gray of early morning in Georgia, that color that hasn't committed to anything yet but is leaning toward light. The gospel station was still playing. I turned it down low, just enough to feel it rather than hear it. I had Earl Dupree's number in my phone now. I had added it before I left Atlanta on Friday, just as I had planned. I called him at 6:45. He picked up on the second ring. Earl had always been an early riser. Reginald said it came from years of emergency lockout calls at all hours. Your body eventually just decided sleeping past 6 was a luxury it couldn't afford. "Earl," I said, "it's Dorothy Calloway, Reginald's wife." A pause. Warm. "Dorothy May. Lord have mercy. How long has it been?" "Too long," I said. "Earl, I need a favor. I need you to meet me at my house this morning. 7:30 if you can." "Everything all right?" "It will be," I said. "Someone changed my lock while I was away. I need it changed back." Another pause. Shorter this time. Earl Dupree had been a locksmith for 40 years. He had heard enough stories to know when not to ask for more of one. 7:30, he said. "I'll be there." I parked 2 blocks from the house and walked. The neighborhood was quiet the way Atlanta neighborhoods are quiet on early Sunday mornings. A dog barking somewhere distant, a sprinkler running in someone's yard, the smell of someone's breakfast drifting from a cracked window. The kind of quiet that feels temporary, like the world is gathering itself before the day begins. My magnolia trees came into view first. That's always how I knew I was home. I could see the tops of them before I could see the house, the dark glossy leaves catching whatever light was available. They were 40 years old now, those trees. Taller than the roofline, wider than Reginald had ever imagined they would get. He had planted them the first spring after we moved in, 2 small saplings from the nursery on Bankhead, each one barely taller than 4-year-old Darnell, who had insisted on helping and had patted the dirt around the roots with both hands, and the absolute seriousness of a child performing important work. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at my house. The new lock caught the early light, a sleek silver hardware, modern and anonymous. The kind of lock that belonged on a downtown condo, not on a 40-year-old home on Hollowell Parkway. It sat in my door like a stranger wearing someone else's clothing. Earl arrived at 7:28 in a white truck that had his name on the side in faded red letters. He climbed out slowly. Earl moved the way older men who have spent decades crouching and kneeling move, with the careful deliberateness of someone who has made a private arrangement with his body about what it will and will not be asked to do. He saw me, and his face opened up. "Dorothy May Calloway." He shook his head. "You look just like yourself." "I try to," I said. He looked at the door. He looked at the lock. His expression shifted in the small, contained way of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at and was choosing not to say so. "That's not the original hardware," he said. "No, it's not. What do you want to put back?" I had stopped at a hardware store on my way down, a small family-owned place on Marietta Street that opened at 7. I handed Earl the bag. Inside was a brass deadbolt, solid and simple, the kind Reginald and I had put on the door back in 1989. Heavy, real. Earl looked at it and nodded once. "Good choice," he said. He set his toolbox down on the porch, my porch, the porch where Reginald had died and where I had sat 10,000 mornings with my coffee, and he went to work. I stood beside him with my arms crossed and watched. It took him 34 minutes. He was thorough, Earl was. He checked the door frame, made sure the new hardware was seated properly, tested the swing of the door. When he was done, he handed me 2 keys on a small ring. "You want a third?" he asked. "No," I said. 2 is enough." He packed up his tools. He looked at me the way men of his generation look at women of a certain age who are standing their ground, not with pity, not with admiration exactly, but with a kind of quiet recognition, the look of someone who has seen this before and knows how it goes. "Reginald would have handled this differently," Earl said. "Reginald's not here," I said. "No." He picked up his toolbox. "That's why you are." He walked back to his truck. I stood on my porch with 2 keys in my hand and the new brass lock gleaming in the morning light, and I put the key in, and I turned it, and my front door opened. The house smelled different. That was the first thing. Lavender something. A diffuser, I would later learn, that Simone ran constantly in the main room. Underneath it, something synthetic and floral that I associated with the particular kind of expensive that is designed to make you feel like you are somewhere better than where you are. My house had always smelled like coffee and wood, and on good days, whatever was in the oven, it had smelled like us. It did not smell like us anymore. I stood in the front hallway and let it land. Then I went to work. I started in the living room. The sofa had been moved back toward the window, for the light, for the content, and I moved it back to where it belonged, the 2 indentations in the hardwood floor marking its proper place like an old signature. The coffee table had been replaced with something low and glass-topped that I did not recognize. I moved it to the side and brought the original one, Reginald's solid pecan wood, built by his own hands in the garage in 1987, back from where it had been pushed against the far wall. Then I went upstairs. The master bedroom, my bedroom, the room where I had slept for 38 years, had been transformed so thoroughly that for a moment I stood in the doorway and felt something cold move through me. Not anger, something older and quieter than anger. Grief, maybe. The particular grief of seeing something you love made unrecognizable. My quilt was gone from the bed. The lace curtains I had sewn myself 30 years ago had been replaced with beige blackout panels. The nightstand I had kept beside my bed for 30 years, a modest thing, painted white, with a small drawer where I kept Reginald's watch and a photograph of Darnell at age 6, had been cleared of everything and replaced with a white marble tray holding Simone's diffuser and 3 candles. I unplugged the diffuser. I moved everything of Simone's from the room into the hallway, not thrown, not dropped. Set down carefully, with the same hands I had used to fold 1,000 loads of laundry, to pack school lunches, to plant okra seeds in red Georgia clay. Then I went to the guest room. Simone had made it entirely her own. Her clothes hung in the closet in a color-coordinated row. Her shoes, and Lord, there were so many shoes, lined the baseboard in careful pairs. Her luggage, leather and monogrammed, sat at the foot of the bed. Her silk robe hung on the back of the door like it owned the place. I brought it all downstairs. Every suitcase, every shoe, every bag and box and cosmetic case. I carried it through the front door, and I set it on the porch, on the front walk, on the lawn. Arranged, orderly, visible. Not as an attack, as a fact. The morning was bright and mild for November. A jogger went past and slowed to look. I gave a small wave. He waved back and kept going. I went inside and made coffee. My own coffee. The dark roast I had kept in the back of the cabinet behind the fancy pour-over equipment Simone had installed. I found my red kettle. The one she had said was too loud, under the sink. Still good, still mine. I put it on the stove. I sat at my kitchen table, and I waited. The sound came at 9:17. The door handle, turning, catching, not catching. Then knocking, sharp, impatient. "Dorothy?" Simone's voice, high and thin with an edge in it I had never heard before. "There's something wrong with the lock. Dorothy, can you open the door?" I sipped my coffee. More knocking. Harder. "Dorothy, my things are on the lawn. What is going on? Open this door right now." I set my cup down. I stood up. I straightened my cardigan. And I walked to the front door and opened it. They were both there. Darnell, pale as I had ever seen him, his jaw tight. Simone, red-faced, her arms crossed, her sunglasses pushed up on her head, wearing the silk robe I had just carried off the back of the guest room door. She must have been in it when I moved her things. She looked at the lawn. She looked at me. "What," she said, "is this?" I looked at her steadily. "Those are your things," I said. "I've set them outside. You had no right—" "I had every right," I said. "This is my home. My name is on the deed. My name has been on the deed since before you were old enough to drive." "Mama," Darnell stepped forward. His voice was careful, the way you are careful with something you think might break. "Mama, let's just talk about this. There was a misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," I said. I looked at him, and I made myself look at all of him. Not the baby, not the boy, not the version of him I kept preserved in my heart like something in amber. The man standing on my porch in November, who had known what his wife was planning, who had eaten my biscuits and said drive safe and let it happen anyway. "You knew," I said, quiet, even. "You knew she was going to change the lock, and you chose not to tell me, and you chose not to stop it." His mouth opened, closed. "I slept in my car, Darnell," I said. "Your 63-year-old mother slept in her car in a parking lot because you did not find the courage to make one phone call." The silence that followed was the kind that fills up every corner of a space, leaves no room for anything else. Simone spoke first. Her voice had changed. Some of the sharpness had gone out of it, replaced by something more careful. "I didn't think you'd be back until noon," she said. "You said Sunday, but you didn't say what time." "I said Sunday by noon," I said. "It was 8 in the morning." "Well, I didn't—" "You planned this before I left," I said. "I heard you. Wednesday night. I heard you on the phone." Her face went very still. "You can come inside," I said, looking at them both, "to collect anything you need that I haven't already brought out. You have 30 minutes. After that, you'll need to schedule a time to come back for the rest, and I'll be present when you do." "Where are we supposed to go?" Darnell asked. His voice had lost its careful quality. There was something raw under it. "I don't know," I said. "But that's a question you should have asked before you decided I didn't need a place to sleep." I stepped aside. I held the door. After a moment, they walked through it. I did not follow them through the house. I returned to the kitchen and stood at the window, looking out at my garden. The okra stalks, cut back for winter. The tomato cages leaning patient against the fence. The pecan tree, bare now, its branches making their particular intricate pattern against the November sky. Reginald had loved that tree. He had loved standing under it in summer when it was full and green, loved picking up the pecans in fall, loved the way it changed with the season and stayed itself through all of it. "Roots, Dorothy," I could hear him saying. "That's all it is. You know where your roots are. You know who you are." I heard Simone's heels on the hardwood upstairs, heard drawers opening, the zip of a suitcase, heard Darnell's slower footsteps in the hallway. I poured myself a second cup of coffee. I waited. At 9:51, they came back downstairs, each of them with a bag. Simone did not look at me as she passed through the kitchen toward the back door. Darnell stopped. He stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hallway. His bag was at his feet. He looked like a man trying to remember the words to something important that he had known a long time ago and let himself forget. "Mama," he said. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. I know that too." He picked up his bag. He looked around the kitchen, at the red kettle on the stove, at my puzzle half finished on the counter, at the clock above the refrigerator running 15 seconds slow. He looked at these things the way you look at things you are leaving and are not certain you have the right to miss. "I'll call you," he said. "I'll be here," I said. He walked out. The front door closed behind them, and I stood in my kitchen, in the house I had bought in 1983 with a toddler on my hip and a down payment it had taken 7 years to save, in the house where my husband had lived and died, and where I had spent 41 years becoming exactly who I was, and I listened to the particular silence of a space that has just been reclaimed. The clock ticked its slow, imprecise rhythm. The kettle was warm on the stove. Outside, the magnolia trees stood in the November light, their roots so deep by now that nothing short of the earth itself moving was going to put them down. I picked up my phone and called Althea. She answered on the first ring. "It's done," I said. She let out a long breath. Not surprised, just relieved. The way you are relieved when something you have believed in for a long time is finally proven right. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. Outside the kitchen window, a cardinal landed on the fence post, a red so bright it looked like something the morning had made up just to have something to look at. "Like myself," I said. "I feel exactly like myself." The first thing I did after I hung up with Althea was open every window in the house. Not because it was warm enough for that. It was November in Atlanta, and the air coming in was cold and carried the smell of dry leaves and distant wood smoke. But I needed the house to breathe. I needed the lavender diffuser smell and the expensive floral something to have somewhere to go. I went from room to room, the hardwood floors announcing each step the way they always had, and I pushed up every sash, and I stood in the middle of the living room and let the cold air move through. Then I went to the attic. The flannel bundle was exactly where I had left it, on the shelf next to Reginald's fishing tackle box and a cardboard box labeled Darnell. School papers in my own handwriting from 1998. I carried it downstairs carefully, the way you carry something that belongs to someone who is no longer here to protect it themselves. I unwrapped it on the kitchen table. My mother's embroidery, linen backing, gone soft with age. The stitching she had done by hand over the course of a winter, cross-stitch in dark red and green thread. Every letter even and precise because my mother did not do anything halfway. A house is wood and nail. A home is blood and love. She had given it to me the Christmas after Reginald and I moved in. She was 54 years old that year, healthy and sharp and absolutely certain about everything she believed, the way some women are. She hung it on the wall herself, standing on a kitchen chair because she was barely 5 feet tall and too proud to ask for a step stool. She died 7 years later. The embroidery had been on that wall ever since. I carried it to the living room. The hook Reginald had put in the wall in 1984 was still there. They had not removed the hook, just the thing that hung on it, which told me something about the quality of the attention they had paid. I lifted the embroidery and set it back in its place. I stepped back and looked at it. There you are, I thought. There we all are. I spent the rest of that Sunday putting the house back together. Not all of it. Some things were gone, like Reginald's lawn chair that Simone had donated without asking, and those things I would have to grieve separately, in my own time. But what could be restored, I restored. My quilt back on the bed. My lace curtains, I found them folded in a box in the closet underneath a stack of Simone's throw pillows, rehung in the windows where they belonged. My puzzle moved back to the kitchen table, my red kettle on its proper burner. I found my address book in the nightstand where I had always kept it, untouched. I found the small framed photograph of Reginald and me on our 25th anniversary, which had been moved from the kitchen windowsill to the back of a shelf in the pantry, and I brought it back to the window where the light could find it. I found, in the kitchen drawer where Simone had organized the mail, 9 envelopes addressed to me that had been opened and neatly restacked. 2 of them were from the county tax assessor's office. 1 was from my bank. 1 was from Howard Lattimore's firm, a standard annual correspondence about my estate documents. I sat down at the kitchen table with those 9 envelopes and I read every one of them carefully. Then I called Reverend Althea back. "Althea," I said, "Simone was opening my mail." A silence. "How much of it?" "9 pieces that I've found so far. 2 from the tax assessor." Another silence, longer. "Dorothy May, call Howard Lattimore first thing tomorrow morning." "That was already the plan," I said. "Good." A pause. "Is there anything in those letters that concerns you? From a legal standpoint?" I thought about the 2 letters from the county assessor. One was routine, annual property tax statement, paid as it always was on time. The other was a response to an inquiry I had not made. "Dear Ms. Calloway, thank you for your interest in the process for adding a co-owner to a residential property deed. Please find attached the required forms and documentation." I read that sentence to Althea. The silence on her end was very still. "She hadn't filed anything," I said. "The forms are blank. She had requested them, but nothing was submitted." "Because you came back before she had time." "Yes." "Dorothy." Althea's voice was careful and firm, the voice she used when she was about to say something she needed you to hear completely. "You call Howard Lattimore tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." Howard Lattimore had been my lawyer since 1994, when Reginald and I had updated our wills after Darnell was born. He had handled Reginald's estate after he passed, quietly and competently, and he had the particular quality I valued most in a professional. He treated me like I was intelligent. He answered his cell phone on the 4th ring, with the slightly cautious tone of a man who checks the caller ID before picking up on a Sunday evening. "Dorothy Calloway," he said. "It's been a while." "It has, Howard. I'm sorry to call on a Sunday." "Don't be. What's happening?" I told him. All of it, in the same careful and factual way I had told Althea, because Howard was a man who worked better with facts than with feelings, and I had enough clarity by then to give him exactly what he needed. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I had always appreciated about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The inquiry to the tax assessor's office," he said. "Do you still have that letter?" Sitting in front of me. "Good. Don't throw it away. Don't give it to anyone." Another pause. "Dorothy, the fact that they hadn't filed anything yet means we are in a position of prevention rather than remedy. That's a significantly better position to be in." "I know. I want to see you this week, Tuesday if you can manage it." "I can manage it." "We're going to update your will, add explicit protections to the property deed, and document everything that's happened. All of it. The opened mail, the inquiry letter, the lock change, everything." He paused again. "I also want to talk to you about power of attorney. You need someone you trust named, someone who isn't Darnell, at least for now." "Reverend Althea Burgess," I said without hesitation. "Does she know?" "She will by the time I hang up." A brief sound that might have been a laugh. "All right, Dorothy. Tuesday at 2 o'clock. "Thank you, Howard." "Don't thank me yet. But you did the right thing calling when you did. A few more weeks and this could have been a very different conversation." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long while. The clock ticked. The evening had settled fully outside, the sky gone dark blue through the kitchen window, the porch light coming on automatically the way it had for 20 years. I thought about Darnell, about where he and Simone were tonight, what motel or friend's couch or awkward arrangement they had found. I thought about the boy who had patted soil around magnolia roots with both hands at age 4, certain he was doing something important. He had been doing something important. He just hadn't known enough then to understand what. I did not call him that night, but I thought about calling him. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Tuesday morning, 2 days before my appointment with Howard, I was going through the rest of the kitchen drawer, making sure I had found everything, when I came across a small spiral notebook. Pale blue cover, the kind sold in grocery stores 3 for $1. It was not mine. I recognized Simone's handwriting from the labels she had put on the refrigerator shelves. Precise, stylized, each letter slightly more deliberate than natural handwriting tends to be, the penmanship of someone who was conscious of being seen. I should not have read it. I want to be honest about that. I know I should not have read it. I read it. It was not a diary. It was more like a planning document, notes about the house, about what she intended to do with each room, paint colors and furniture, and the names of contractors she had apparently already contacted about renovating the kitchen. There were budget figures, there were timelines, and on the third page, a note that stopped me cold. Check with deed. His name needs to be on it before anything else moves forward. He said his mom would never notice if we just... The sentence stopped there. Incomplete. Maybe she had been interrupted. Maybe she had thought better of finishing it in writing. I sat at the kitchen table holding that notebook, and I felt something move through me that was not quite any of the emotions I might have expected. Not rage, not betrayal exactly. The betrayal I had already known about and already accounted for. Something more like the cold, clarifying sensation of a final piece falling into place. His name needs to be on it. Darnell, my son, whose name was not on my deed, whose name had never been on my deed, who had apparently been a part of this conversation, he said, and had said nothing to me about any of it. I set the notebook on the table next to the letter from the tax assessor. Then I picked up my phone and I called Darnell. He answered after 2 rings, his voice carrying the careful, slightly braced quality it had held every time we had spoken since Sunday. "Mama, I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to answer me honestly." A pause. "Okay. Did you and Simone discuss putting your name on my deed?" The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. I counted them. "Mama, yes or no, Darnell?" Another second. "It came up," he said. "She brought it up. I told her it wasn't something we could just do without you knowing." "But you didn't tell me she had brought it up." "I didn't think she was actually going to..." "Darnell," I kept my voice level. I had decided before I called that I was going to keep my voice level. "I found her notebook. I know what she was planning, and I know that you knew about it." The silence this time was different, heavier. "I'm sorry, Mama," he said quietly. "I know you are," I said. "I'll talk to you soon." I hung up. I sat with the notebook and the letter for a moment longer. Then I put them both in a folder and wrote Howard. Tuesday on the tab. Howard's office still smelled like leather and printer ink, and Howard himself had aged in the ways good lawyers age. More gray, more quietly certain, more sparing with words that didn't need to be said. He reviewed everything I brought him without changing his expression, which was itself a kind of reassurance. "She hadn't submitted anything," he confirmed, setting down the tax assessor letter. "And without your signature, she couldn't have. Georgia law is clear on that." "I know," I said. "But the intent was there. Documented." He tapped the notebook with one finger. "And your son's awareness of the discussion, even if he claims he discouraged it, is relevant." "I'm not trying to get anyone in legal trouble," I said. "I want the house protected. I want my documents in order. I want to make sure this cannot happen again. Not this specifically, but any version of this." Howard nodded. "We'll update the will with explicit language about the property. We'll add a restriction that requires your written, witnessed consent for any transfer, addition, or modification of ownership. We'll document the incident fully in case it ever becomes relevant." He paused. "And I want to suggest one more thing." "What's that?" "A letter to Darnell. Not threatening, not legal in nature, just clear. Explaining what you know, what you've done to protect yourself, and what the terms are going forward if he wants to be part of your life and part of any future consideration regarding this property." I thought about that. "I'll write it myself," I said. "You don't need to draft it." He smiled slightly. "I suspected you might say that." We spent another hour going through the documents. By the time I left his office, the sky outside was that particular shade of late afternoon gold that Atlanta does better than anywhere else I have ever been. Low and warm and absolute, like the day has decided to mean something on its way out. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home. I bought the good butter, the kind in the gold wrapper. I bought fresh collard greens and cornmeal and a small bunch of yellow tulips because Reginald had always brought me tulips in November when no one else thought to, and I saw no reason to stop receiving them just because he was no longer here to bring them. It was the following Thursday when the phone rang with a Chicago area code. I almost didn't answer. I did not know anyone in Chicago except by distant association, and distant associations calling on a Thursday afternoon rarely meant good news. But something made me pick up. "Mrs. Calloway?" A woman's voice, careful, carrying something in it I couldn't immediately name. My name is Donna Whitfield. I'm Simone's mother. I sat down. I know this is unexpected, she said. I almost didn't call. I want you to know that I almost didn't. But you did, I said. Yes, a breath. I did because I think you deserve to hear this, and I don't know if anyone else is going to say it to you. She paused. I am sorry for what my daughter did. I am sorry for what she put you through in your own home. I know that an apology from me doesn't fix anything. It doesn't, I said, gently, not to be unkind, just to be honest. No, she agreed. It doesn't. Another pause. She's not a bad person. I want to believe that. She is my daughter, and I love her, and I have been trying to teach her differently for 35 years, and some lessons just don't take the way you hope they will. I thought about Darnell, about all the years I had spent hoping certain lessons had taken, about how parenthood is in some ways an act of profound faith in the face of considerable evidence to the contrary. I understand that feeling, I said. I know there's nothing I can do, Donna Whitfield said. I just needed you to know that what she did was wrong, and that not everyone on her side of this sees it differently than you do. A brief, quiet laugh. In fact, I'm not sure there are many people on her side of this at all. Even Darnell, from what I understand. I looked out the kitchen window, my garden, my pecan tree, the 2 magnolia trees visible from the side window, their dark leaves steady in the November wind. How is she? I asked, and I meant it honestly. Not out of warmth for Simone exactly, but out of the recognition that she was a person, and people doing wrong things are still people. Embarrassed, Donna said, which is new. She doesn't embarrass easily. A pause. She sent you something. I don't know if you've received it yet. I haven't gotten anything. You will. She didn't tell me what it was, just that she wanted to send it. We talked for a few more minutes, not about Simone, not about the house, about Atlanta and Chicago, about what it meant to raise children who surprised you, not always in the ways you wanted, about the particular exhaustion of loving someone who makes it difficult. When we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I had not expected that call. Of all the things I had prepared myself for in the days since Sunday, a phone call from Simone's mother expressing regret was not among them. It reminded me of something Reginald used to say. Dorothy May, people will surprise you. Not always pleasantly, but sometimes. Sometimes. The package arrived 2 days later. Small, brown-wrapped Chicago postmark. Inside was a velvet pouch, small and blue, and inside the pouch was a locket. Gold-plated, delicate, the kind you buy for sentiment and not for value. I opened the clasp carefully. One side held a photograph. Me, younger, perhaps 15 years ago, holding Darnell's arm at some family occasion I couldn't immediately place, both of us laughing at something out of frame. I looked happy in the photograph. I looked like someone who had not yet learned what it felt like to sleep in her car outside her own house. The other side was empty. There was no note, just the locket. I held it for a long time. I thought about what Clara, Althea, had said once, about gestures. A gesture is only worth what follows it. Simone had sent this without words, without explanation, without asking anything. Maybe that was the best she could do. Maybe it was the beginning of something more. Maybe it was the end of something that needed ending. I didn't know. I set it on the kitchen table next to the sugar bowl, and I left it there, and I let it mean whatever it was going to mean in its own time. Darnell knocked on my door on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after the morning I had set Simone's things on the lawn. I saw him through the window before I answered, standing on my porch in a jacket too light for the weather. No Simone, hands empty. No flowers, no food, no peace offering of any kind. Just him, in the cold, looking at the door like a man who wasn't sure he still had the right to knock on it, but had decided to knock anyway. I let him knock twice before I opened it. He looked tired. Not the tired of a bad night's sleep, but the tired of someone who has been doing significant internal work and finding it harder than he expected. His face had a quality I hadn't seen in some years. Something stripped of its usual smoothness, something that looked unexpectedly like his father at 42, when Reginald had gone through his own season of reckoning and come out the other side quieter and more himself than he had been before. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He sat in the living room, on the sofa, not in any chair that could be construed as claiming territory, and he looked at my mother's embroidery on the wall, and I saw something move across his face when he saw it back in its place. He looked at it for a moment longer than was casual. I sat in the armchair across from him. Between us, Reginald's pecan wood coffee table, solid and unhurried and exactly where it belonged. "I've been trying to figure out what to say," Darnell began. "Take your time," I said. "See," said. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at his hands. "I've been thinking about who I've been. In this house. To you. For the last few years, really. Not just these past months." He paused. "I think I've been telling myself a story where I was managing a difficult situation, where I was in the middle, doing my best, where everybody had some fault and I was just trying to keep things together." He looked up, but that's not what was happening. "No," I said. "It wasn't. What was happening was that I kept choosing her comfort over your dignity, over and over, and I told myself it was balance, but it wasn't. It was just easier." He said the word like it tasted bad. "She had strong opinions, and she expressed them loudly, and you were quiet and accommodating, and so I just kept going in the direction of least resistance." I looked at my son. This man who had once been so small that I could hold him with one arm, who had learned to tie his shoes at this table, who had cried on this couch when his first serious girlfriend broke his heart at 17, and I had sat beside him and said nothing, because sometimes saying nothing is the most loving thing you can do. "I'm not asking you to choose between us," I said. "I'm not asking you to stop loving your wife, or to see her as a villain, or to come back here and act like the last 3 months didn't happen. I'm asking for something simpler than any of that." "What?" he asked. "I'm asking you to be a man who knows who his mother is," I said. "Not what I can provide, not what I'm willing to give. Who I am. After 63 years of living, after 35 years of teaching other people's children, after 41 years in this house, who I am." He was quiet. "Do you know?" I asked. He looked at me for a long time, and in his face I watched something happen, a slow, effortful process, like a door that has been painted shut for years being worked open joint by joint. The kind of opening that doesn't make a dramatic sound, just gives finally, under sustained and honest pressure. "You're the person who made this house a home," he said quietly. "You and Daddy. And when Daddy was gone, just you. And I moved in here and let someone take that apart piece by piece, and I didn't say a word." His voice had roughened. "I'm ashamed of that, Mama. I want you to know I'm genuinely ashamed. I let that sit. Let him sit in it too, because shame that leads somewhere is worth feeling fully." "Are you and Simone still together?" I asked. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "We're talking. There are things that need to be said between us that have needed to be said for a while. Things that aren't about you." He paused. "I don't think she's a bad person." "I don't either," I said, and meant it. "But intentions and impact are different things, and she impacted me badly. And you let her. Both of those things are true." He nodded. "The will has been updated," I said. "The property is protected. Howard Lattimore has documentation of everything that happened. I want you to know that not because I'm threatening you, but because I need you to understand that I am serious about what belongs to me and what I will and will not permit." I held his eyes. "This house is mine. It will remain mine. What happens to it when I'm gone will depend on the relationship we build from here, not on the relationship we used to have. On the one we're going to build." He absorbed that. "That's fair," he said. "I know it is." A pause. Outside, the Sunday afternoon was gray and quiet. Somewhere down the block, someone was raking leaves, the sound of it steady and unhurried. "Can I ask you something?" Darnell said. "You can ask me anything. Do you think you can forgive me? Not right now, not all at once, but eventually." I looked at my son, this complicated, imperfect, wind without enough roots man who was trying visibly and with some difficulty to grow them. "I already have," I said. "Forgiveness isn't the question. The question is what we do next." He nodded slowly, looked at the embroidery on the wall again. "She made that? Your grandmother?" "My mother." "I didn't know that." "There's a great deal you didn't know," I said, not harshly, just truthfully. That's part of what we're going to fix. He stayed for 2 hours. We talked. Really talked. The way we had not talked in years. The way I had stopped expecting we would talk. About Reginald. About what Darnell remembered of growing up in this house. About the magnolia trees he had helped plant, though he didn't remember doing it. About what he wanted his life to look like, separate from what Simone wanted, which was a question he admitted he had stopped asking himself. When he stood to leave, he looked around the living room one more time. At the embroidery. At the pecan wood table. At the photographs restored to their places. "It looks like itself again," he said. "It always was itself," I told him. "It just needed the people who didn't belong here to leave." He hugged me at the door, carefully at first, the way you hug someone you're not sure will accept it. And then, when I put my arms around him, properly, the way a son hugs his mother when he has been away for a long time. Not in distance, but in the way that matters more. "Next Sunday," I said when he pulled back. 10 o'clock. "I'll make your grandmother's biscuits and gravy." He smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen from him in months. Unguarded, surprised into existence by something he hadn't expected to feel. "I'll be here," he said. "I know you will," I said. And I closed the door. Not against him. Simply behind him. The way you close a door when someone has left and you are at peace with both the leaving and the returning. That evening, I went to the attic one more time. I came back down with a small cardboard box. Darnell, age 10 to 14, written on the side. Inside, under old school papers and a deflated football and a photograph I had nearly forgotten, was a picture of Darnell at 12 years old, standing in this driveway, one hand on the handlebars of his first real bicycle, grinning with his whole face, his whole body, his whole being. Reginald stood behind him, one hand on Darnell's shoulder, looking at his son with an expression so purely proud it was almost hard to look at directly. I sat on the edge of my bed and held that photograph for a long time. Then I opened Simone's locket, the empty side. I slid the photograph in. It fit as if the space had been made for it. I lit a candle that evening, the cinnamon one Clara from church had given me for my birthday, the one Simone had once called dated. I set it on the kitchen windowsill and let it burn. Outside, the Atlanta evening was settling in cold and clear, the kind of night that reminds you winter is honest even when it's uncomfortable. I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote, not to Darnell, not to Simone, not to anyone living. "Reginald, I want you to know that the house is all right. I want you to know that I am all right. Better than all right. I want you to know that the magnolia trees are still standing and the pecan tree is still holding its own, and the floors still creak in the same 3 places they have always creaked, and I think they always will. I handled it. I handled it the way you taught me to handle things, not with noise, but with steadiness, not with anger, but with clarity. You always said those were my best qualities. I didn't believe you for a long time. I believe you now. I'm sorry it took losing you to find out who I was without someone to hold me up, but I have found it, and I'm not letting it go again. The house knows. These walls know. The roots know. All my love. Always, Dorothy May." I folded the letter and put it in the box with the deed, with Howard's updated documents, with the letter from the tax assessor and Simone's notebook and all the evidence of everything that had happened and everything I had done about it. I closed the box. I put it back under the bed where it had always lived, where it would stay, where anyone who needed to find it would find it. Then I blew out the candle, turned off the kitchen light, and walked through my house in the dark the way I had walked through it 1,000 times, knowing every step, every creak, every place where the floor dipped slightly toward the east side of the hallway, every sound the house made when it was settling into the night. I knew this place. I had always known this place. It knew me back. Darnell came the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. We did not fix everything. You do not fix 40 years of accumulated distance and the particular damages of the last several months in a handful of Sunday mornings over biscuits and gravy. But we began, and beginning, when it is honest and mutual, and without the performance of things being better than they are, is everything. Simone I did not hear from directly, except for the locket. I did not reach out to her. There was a time for that. Maybe, somewhere ahead. A conversation that would require both of us to be more honest than was comfortable, about what had happened and why, about what we had each brought to it. But that time was not yet. What I had was enough for now. my house, my table. My name on the deed, on the mortgage, on 41 years of the kind of ownership that goes deeper than paper. My mother's embroidery on the wall. My son at my kitchen table, learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to be someone his father would recognize. My magnolia trees out front, their roots sunk so deep by now that the earth itself would have to move to shake them. I have lived in this house since I was 29 years old. I have loved in it, and grieved in it, and raised a child in it, and buried a husband and remade myself in it, more than once. I know every inch of it the way you know your own face, not because it is perfect, but because it is entirely and completely yours. No one takes that from you without your permission, and I had withdrawn my permission. I want to tell you something, if you have stayed with me this long. Something I did not fully understand until I was standing on my own porch with 2 keys in my hand and a brass deadbolt that clicked with the weight of everything I had spent 41 years building. You are allowed to take up space, not just in a house, in a life, in a family, in the room where you have always sat, at the table where you have always eaten, in the conversation where your voice has always belonged. You do not owe anyone your silence. You do not owe anyone the bottom shelf of your own refrigerator. You do not have to pack your things into a box and carry them to the attic so that someone else can find the aesthetic pleasing. You are allowed to say, "This is mine. I built this. I am still here." You are allowed to stand straight. Althea told me that. Stand straight the whole time. I did, and I will. The following spring, the magnolia trees bloomed the way they do every year, extravagant and unhurried and completely certain of themselves. White flowers opening against the April sky like something that has been patiently waiting all winter to say what it needs to say. I stood on my porch on a Sunday morning with my coffee and watched them bloom. Darnell's car turned onto the block at 9:58. I could see it from the porch. He parked in the driveway, his father's driveway, the one Reginald had sealed and resealed every few years, the one with the faint tire mark from a bicycle accident in 1993 that never quite faded. He got out. He looked up at the magnolia trees. He stood there for a moment, looking at them the way you look at something you have always known was there but are seeing, perhaps for the first time, clearly. Then he looked at me on the porch. I raised my coffee cup. He smiled, that unguarded smile, the one that had surprised him into existence a few months ago, and seemed to be finding its way back more easily now. He walked up the path between the 2 magnolia trees, under their wide white branches, and came up the porch steps, and I held the front door open for him. My son, my home, my roots, still holding.